Hi everyone, it's Aunty Kath here again. Well, we're at the end of the week. It's Friday and I've been reading stories every day. First one was Mr. Noisy on Monday, if you remember. I liked him. And we met Mrs. Crumb. And we met Mr. Bacon. He's probably one of our favourite characters of the week. I'm going to tell you, I didn't have bacon last night. I had, what did I have? Do you know, I can't remember what I had last night. But I know tonight I'm having sausages. So there you go. And then we had Mr. Cool, who was a cool dude, remember? And he was with Jack Robinson. There's Mr. Cool. Then we had Mr. Fussy. It's Mr. Fussy. And Mr. Clumsy, who came to visit. He had a good smile. And then we had Mr. Bump, who was always having accidents. Poor Mr. Bump. And he had a funny old smile on the side. And today, my story's for all of you again. Everyone I've mentioned this week. But this one's especially for our Ellen, because I was speaking to her yesterday and she said, Aunty Kath, could you possibly read... She gave me about 5 titles, I think. And one of them was Mr. Greedy. Here he is, Mr. Greedy. I've been a bit greedy this week, actually, being in. Not being able to go out like you haven't. And I've eaten all sorts. In fact, in front of me now, I've got a finger of fudge. And I've got a packet of quavers. Just in case I get hungry or a bit greedy while I'm reading the story. Wouldn't you just love a bit of that? Ooh, a finger of fudge is just enough to give yourself a treat. Ooh. And I know you all love quavers. All of you. Jack, Ellen, Sophia, Isabel, Anna. You eat me out of quavers. You eat me out house and home. Right, let's start with Mr. Greedy. Now, he's pink. I haven't quite got a pink top on, but nearly. So, Mr. Greedy. I'll be interested to hear about him, because can't remember this story. It's ages since I've read it. So Mr. Greedy. Well, as you can imagine, Mr. Greedy liked to eat. In fact, Mr. Greedy loved to eat. In fact, the more he ate, the fatter he became. And the trouble was, the fatter he became, the more hungry he became. And the more hungry he became, the more he ate. And the more he ate, the fatter he became. And it went on and on and on. If you have a look, he's got a smile. But his smile is like a hungry smile. Right. So we've got a Mr. Greedy smile. It's nice for all our characters have got smiles. Mr. Greedy lived in a house that looked rather like himself, actually. It was a roly-poly sort of house that he lived in. Look, there it is. It's different from the other Mr. Men houses that we've seen this week. A roly-poly kind of house, that one. One morning, Mr. Greedy woke up a bit earlier than usual. He'd been dreaming about food. I dream about food sometimes. I dream about chocolate cake. Oof, I love chocolate cake. Nice bit of chocolate cake. And that made him wake up feeling hungry. So he got up and went downstairs for his breakfast. And he ate the most enormous breakfast. This is what Mr. Greedy has for his breakfast. Toast, 2 slices. Cornflakes, 1 packet. Milk, 1 bottle. Sugar, 1 bowlful. Toast, 3 slices. Eggs, 3 boiled. Toast, 4 slices. Butter, 1 whole dish. Marmalade, 1 whole pot. And there's his eggs lined up. See that? I mean, I like a bit of toast myself, but not that much. But when he finished, Mr. Greedy sat back in his chair and smiled a very satisfied smile. Oh, that was a delicious breakfast, he thought. Now, I wonder what would be nice to have for lunch. He decided to work up an appetite. He'd go for a nice, long walk. That morning, Mr. Greedy walked and walked and walked and walked and walked and walked and walked. Then he discovered a cave. That's funny, he thought. I've never seen that cave before. Wonder where that's come from. Well, Mr. Greedy, being a curious sort of fellow, decided to explore. So he entered the deep, dark cave. Ooh. Inside, he discovered some giant steps leading upwards. Mr. Greedy, being a very curious sort of fellow, decided he'd climb them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They were very steep and very difficult to climb. And with much huffing and puffing, Mr. Greedy climbed up and up and up, right to the very top. And at the top he came to a door. It was without doubt the biggest door Mr. Greedy had ever seen. And it wasn't quite shut. And Mr. Greedy, being that curious sort of fellow, decided to see what was on the other side of that door. So he squeezed himself through the crack in the door. And there before him was an amazing sight. In fact, it was the biggest room in the world. The floor was as big as a field. The table in the middle of the floor was as big as a house. And the chair around the table was high as trees. Look, there you go. Can you see? Look how little Mr. Greedy is against the chair and the table. Mr. Greedy felt very, very small. And then he sniffed. Coming from somewhere on top of that gigantic table was the most delicious foody smell Mr. Greedy had ever smelled. Mr. Greedy sniffed again. And he decided that he must get up on that table. So he began to climb up the leg of that enormous chair. It was very difficult and it took him a long time, but eventually he got up and stood on the table. Everything was larger than life. The salt and pepper pots were as big as post boxes. They were ginormous. There was a bowl of fruit on the table. And Mr. Greedy tried to lift one of the oranges. Look at the size of the orange. Wow. It was enormous. And Mr. Greedy, well, being Mr. Greedy, took a bite out of one of the apples there. Then he looked around. Over on the other side of the table was the source of that delicious smell. There was a huge, enormous, gigantic, colossal plate. And on the plate, there were sausages the size of pillows. A huge, enormous, gigantic potato the size of beach balls, and a huge, enormous, gigantic, colossal peas the size of cabbages. Mr. Greedy hurried across the table towards the plate, and being Mr. Greedy, he began to eat. Oh, he couldn't get it down quick enough. Oh, it's like me when I see a Sunday roast. Oh, I just love a Sunday roast. Roast potatoes and nice bit of beef. Yorkshire puddings. Oh, our Anna loves Yorkshire puddings. She's the Yorkshire pudding queen. She could eat 10 in one go. Suddenly, a shadow fell across the plate. And Mr. Greedy found himself being picked up by a giant hand. A giant hand. And looking into the eyes of a real-life giant. And who, thundered the giant, are you? Mr. Greedy was so scared, he just managed to squeak his name. Mr. Greedy, Mr. Greedy, he squeaked. The giant laughed as loud as thunder. Ha 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 ha! Greedy by name and greedy by nature, he bellowed. Well, I think, Mr. Greedy, you need to be taught a lesson. Oh, my word. That would frighten the life out of me. And what a lesson it was. There he is, the giant. Look at him. Oh, he's a big old fella. He's a big chap. A big chap. Isn't he, Sophia? Look. That giant made Mr. Greedy eat everything on that huge, enormous, gigantic, colossal plate. He made him eat the lot. The potatoes, the sausages, the peas. And when he'd finished, Mr. Greedy felt very, very ill. And it felt as if he was going to burst at any minute like a big balloon. Now, said the giant in a much quieter voice, do you promise never to be greedy ever again? Oh yes, moaned Mr. Greedy. I promise. I'm full, he said. Absolutely full to the brim. Very well, said the giant. I'll let you go. Look at him, Mr. Greedy against the giant's foot. Ooh. He's a big fella, that giant. Mr. Greedy climbed down from the table and went out through the door feeling very fat and extremely miserable. He had like Mr. Fussy's face. He didn't have that face on that he had earlier on. That wasn't anywhere to be seen because he was so full. And do you know, from this day to that, Mr. Greedy has kept his promise. And you know something else? Mr. Greedy doesn't look like he used to anymore. Look at him. He now looks like this, which I think suits him a lot better, don't you? Look at him. So if you know anybody who's as greedy as Mr. Greedy, you know what to tell them, don't you? Beware of giants. Woo! Well, I'm going to be Mrs. Greedy now. And I think it's about time I had my finger a fudge. And about time I dipped into me quavers. But don't tell anyone. Don't tell Mr. Greedy. Because he's not eating stuff like this anymore. But your Aunty Kath is. Anyway, if you'd like any stories next week, let me know. Because you might have had enough of them by now. But if you haven't, just give me a call. And I'll speak to you soon. Love you all lots. Bye. Have a lovely weekend. Bye.